All right, welcome to week 4. We're going to talk about research designs, qualitative versus quantitative research, and the aspects that fall within those research designs, whether it be the concept of the design, the conceptualization of that, the operationalization, easy for me to say. So if those words are hard to pronounce, I'm sure that they may be just as hard to understand. So we're going to break those down. And then finally, the last aspect of variables. So quantitative versus qualitative design. What I'm going to do is use a study that I recently submitted for publication that was actually some undergraduate research that I supervised, and we've just recently submitted that to the Taylor and Francis publishers. Let me bring that up. In fact, I'll share my screen and I will do my best to use this study as an example for all these concepts, starting with quantitative versus qualitative. So give me one moment to share my screen. And here we go. This is, as I said, Taylor and Francis is the name of the publisher. The journal is called the the Journal of Criminal Justice Education, and the name of the study is From Police Work to Homework, a case study of police officers seeking higher education in the Midwestern United States. And essentially, what we wanted to study was what are the challenges to police officers as they seek higher education, as they go back to school or go to school for the first time? In fact, let me just scroll down here. I'll show you what our research questions were. We'll scroll all the way down here to the research questions, and I'll tell you exactly what they were. Right here we go. This is what we're trying to study, these two questions. That's what we're trying to answer. What are the challenges to law enforcement officers who return to a higher education after beginning a police career? And how does that return to higher education impact their self-efficacy? So self-efficacy is just kind of a fancy word for how well they feel like they can do their job. So if we wanted to figure out how we design this research, which we needed to do, we needed to figure out how we were going to answer these questions. And we needed to figure out if we're going to do it quantitatively or qualitatively. And just to break those two terms down so we understand what they are, quantitative studies will essentially be answered by math and numbers and surveys, and you could put a numerical response into your answer, as opposed to qualitative methods, which we'll use words and descriptions and observations and documents. Those are all qualitative methods. We would use interviews to get a qualitative data, and we would use surveys or existing crime rate data to get quantitative responses. So as we look at these two research questions, what are the challenges and how does that return impact self-efficacy? How does it impact the way that they feel like they can do their job? That doesn't really lend itself to being able to very easily be answered numerically. That is pretty obviously a qualitative study in and of itself as it's built currently. If we were going to turn this into a quantitative study, we would have to ask some mathematical questions like how do the number of course hours that a police officer takes in higher education, how does that correlate with their chances of being involved in a significant use of force incident? So we'd want to know, how many college credits they're taking versus how many shootings they get into, to boil that down. That could be numerically answered. That would be a quantitative study. But these are pretty easily answered in the qualitative world. So with that being said, I'll stop sharing my screen for now. And what I want to do is just so if we know that that's going to be a qualitative research, we need to know the four aspects of research methods building. As we're building these studies, we're going to have to know the concept of the study, the conceptualization of the study, the operationalization, and the variables. With that said, and again, this is all in your book, but I want to try to break it down for you. So the concept of the study. Concepts are just vague terms that you just know what they are in your head, but we haven't figured out how we're going to study them. Concepts for this study, the study we just talked about, concepts would be like police officers, higher education, challenges, self-efficacy, things like that. We know those are going to be the concept of the study. We don't know, at the beginning, obviously we don't now because that's been submitted for publication, but we don't necessarily know going into it how we're going to work those into a study, but we know those are the concepts we want for this study. We know we want higher education. We know we want police officers. We want law enforcement. We want to know challenges, things like that. So moving forward into the conceptualization phase, that's how we're going to start defining our population. So in that study, the study we just talked about. We need to figure out how it is we're going to define those terms. So we may know what a police officer seeking higher education is, but how do we define that? Is it any officer who works full or part-time, any reserve officer, any supervisor, any line officer, any command officer? And are they taking any classes at all? Just one class? Does that qualify you for the study? Or are we talking about officers that go to school full-time? Are we talking about supervising officers that go to full-time? Are we only talking about detectives? We need to know how we're going to conceptualize this study and how we're going to define those populations. Then, moving on, we get a little bit more muddy as we move on to operationalization. I think I stumbled on that word the first time. Operationalization. That's going to be how we measure the data that we want to find in this study. Usually, the majority of the time we use this term, operationalization, we're talking about quantitative studies. How do we measure? If we were going to use that hypothetical study, I said, is there a correlation between the number of college credit hours that an officer takes and their chances of being involved in a significant use of force incident? We would measure that by, quite literally, we'd count how many college credits they had. That'd be one point of measure. We'd also count how many times that these officers that got into significant use of force incidents were going to college, and how many times they weren't, and we'd be able to categorize those. We're quite literally measuring them by the number of occurrences and the number of college credits. That would be the operationalization. For qualitative, it's a little bit more murky again when it comes to how we would operationalize this. It's how we would gather that data. So we would use methods like in this study, we would use interviews. We would say that it is operationalized by the descriptions of the officers as they describe and discuss their challenges, as they describe and discuss their self-efficacy as they're going to school. That would be how we gather that. That would be how we operationalize it. I really got to get past that word. And then finally, the term I want to make sure we're all on the same page with is variable. Variables are just the items that are being measured. In general, we have dependent and independent variables. And the way I guess the most easy way to, or the easiest way to remember that is that the dependent variable is the one that is being measured. If I'm saying, what is the impact of going to school to being involved in a significant use of force incident, then the dependent variable is the use of force incident. That's what we're being measured. We're not measuring, how often they go to school. That's just what we're using that as our precursor. What we're actually measuring is what are the chances of being involved in a significant incident. What I use a lot of times when I'm teaching this in the classroom, this class, I talk about this hypothetical study of how do street lights impact criminality after dark. Well, what is being studied is not the streetlights. What's being studied is the criminality after dark. So the criminality after dark is the dependent variable. The independent variable would be the streetlights, or in the first case, the independent variable would be, how many college credits there are. So to put that into study words, we are studying the independent variable's impact on the dependent variable. So with that being said, I hope that kind of clears up some of the maybe muddiness or hard to understand. Obviously, operationalization is not easy for me to pronounce, but hopefully it's now easier for you to understand. So with that being said, I will look forward to this week's submissions. Don't forget that Wednesday night is the deadline for the discussion board posts. And then after that, we have a Sunday night submission. So I will grade what submissions come this week as soon as I can and get those results back to you. And until then, rock chalk.